The UK claimed last week that China is behind a worldwide cyber espionage campaign that's affected millions of people. US and British officials filed charges and imposed sanctions, but the Chinese embassy in London described the allegations as completely fabricated and malicious. We're going to discuss this now with the Director of British Foreign Policy Group, Evie Aspinall. Evie, thanks so much for joining us this Sunday. I'd like to talk more about just how entwined the UK is now with China when you think about the arguments over Huawei being part of 5G, how TikTok has proliferated into the lives of our kids and young people. We hear about them being able to switch off electric cars if they want to. Just how entwined is the UK with Chinese influence?
Very, very intertwined. And I think the crucial thing is it's very entwined with some of our critical national infrastructure, particularly around tech. One of the biggest risks is that they can attack, as you say, through cyber attacks, but also through supply chains. So our supply chains end to end are very reliant on China. And the other sector to consider is the higher education sector. We are very reliant on Chinese students, and there's a genuine concern about what some of them might be taking back, some of the knowledge they're taking back to China from the UK.
Yeah, I think it was Boris Johnson's brother, Joe Johnson, when he was Education Secretary, pointed to the fact that the largest group of students in the UK was from China, and we needed to bump up other nations to counteract that, in particular India. And when you look at the stats, that has since happened. But of course, at higher education institutions, they need to make money, and these students are willing to pay. So again, how do we wean ourselves off this influence if that's what we need to do?
I mean, it's very difficult, and it's working out crucially where the challenges are and where the real risks are. It doesn't mean we want to get rid of all Chinese students from the UK by any stretch. It means we need to look at where there are specific challenges and specific risks. And it's what we're not seeing from the UK is we still don't have a clear strategy. We're one of the few countries that doesn't have a public China strategy at the moment. So what that means is it's really hard for universities, businesses, organisations to know where the risks are and what they should be doing to prevent them. So that's the first thing I think we need.
Yeah, and you're right, identifying the risks. Let's just set this in context here. The second most populous country in the world. Of course, the vast majority of Chinese people coming to the UK, Chinese products are legitimate. We're talking about Chinese government influence here, really. And this is something that obviously was raised earlier in the week in the Commons. Oliver Dowden talking about the fact that we'd seen Chinese involvement in looking at our electoral roll and that kind of thing. Do you think they've been too slow, though, to do that, the government?
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things is that we look back at sort of 2015 golden era of UK-China relations, and we were just less than a decade ago saying we want to be China's best partner in the West. And quite clearly that wasn't a coherent or effective strategy. And as we look forwards, we need to think of what is our plan? Where do we want to engage? Because there are areas, particularly around climate change and AI, where we have to work effectively with China if we want to meet these global challenges. But at the same time, we have to shore up our own national resilience as a priority to prevent some of these risks.
In terms of tactics in dealing with this approach from China, we've seen Australia speak up about it. They are firm trading partners with China. I think China is our sixth largest trading partner. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure. Do we need to, as a country, does the government need to speak up a bit more than it's doing at the moment to counteract this influence?
I think so, but we also have to be realistic about how much some of this is going to do. So there's lots of conversations about whether we should designate China as a threat. A lot of that is talk, and actually in practice won't do a lot. I think what we really need is a clearer plan and a clearer strategy. We need to invest in our national security and our national infrastructure. We also need to upskill in a number of areas, not least things like supplying chips that are really critical to our kind of supply chains and to our security. We need to prioritise focusing on our allies and focusing on our own capabilities to mitigate some of those risks.
Look, the backdrop to all this, Evie, just to finish off, is just how strong Xi Jinping is. He's going nowhere.
Exactly. And actually, if we see a Donald Trump presidency in the US by the end of the year, relations between the US and China, and by extension, the UK and China, are only going to worse. So this risk isn't going anywhere. So it's pertinent that we start addressing it now.
Evie Aspinall from the British Foreign Policy Group, thanks so much for joining us to talk about that. And I'm sure it's a conversation that will pop up again in the coming weeks and months.